Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. It's Shirley with Spirit of Matter, and today I want to talk about the origins of eugenics. And no, it's not what you think it is. Way before that, and its connection to modern day suicide ideation. And this is Sedna reverence and Inuit culture reverence. So we have the midheaven in 11 degrees Taurus, which is appropriate to talk about suicide ideation, 11th degree, with Venus in Aries, and the moon is moon hour, moon day. So a little bit reverence to Goddess Moon, Goddess Selene, the goddess of courage. And the moon is approaching is 1 degree from Rahu, just a couple of degrees from 19 degrees Aries, from where the eclipse will take place later today. So, mothers, motherland, ancestry, the origins of what we call eugenics, which is basically interracial, which is within the race or bloodline marriages, which is incest. And the origin of this is actually goes all the way back into all indigenous tribes. And the origins of indigenous tribes, as far as we know today, beyond Africa, is Innuit indigenous tribes. Now, as per eugenics, which basically is supporting interracial marriages, which is within the race or within the bloodline, okay, it's bloodline, DNA, and stuff like that. Some consider this may have been a facet of like Lemuria. I don't know enough about this. And that before we incarnated physically into this world, there was an emphasis on the bloodline and the DNA, and then it was okay to practice it like this, but we weren't in a physical body, at least not as we are today. And incarnating in the physical body creates different standards. So, the stories of creation usually give us not more than 2 people, and then we ask, okay, how do we procreate? Incest, probably. And yes, this is also the reason that as we have new species or new mutants emerging, most of them do not survive. And this is because of this eugenic incestual origin. And so, as the human race, bloodline segregation, which is eugenics, is actually detriment. It is detriment to our immune system, to our nervous systems. It is bringing and reiterating on any hereditary disease. Okay, so you can have a thing like you can catch a flu, but it becomes more and more prevalent because you don't expose yourself to other type of immune systems and bloodlines that could perhaps reduce and dilute the effect of this person's exposure to that disease. Okay? In essence, eugenics is actually assisting in making any viral infection, any disease more viral and more life-risking. So this is one facet. Okay, it's just medically bad for you. The other facet is perhaps the more psychological, but also another type of very life terminal, and this is where incest is practiced. Will and consent usually isn't, and cannot be, and so the negligence of bodily autonomy to the detriment of the community actually is allowing for life-altering perceptions to concur within the person. So if a person doesn't even have a bodily autonomy, they're already experiencing death. Okay? You have to ask yourself, why do people who go through rape, for example, are so liable to commit suicide? Because they've already experienced a certain, they feel like they're alive, they feel dead. Maybe if they die, they will be more alive even, or at least end the suffering, okay? So it's basically an attempt to touch life rather than, yes, but yes, to end the suffering as well. And so people who don't have bodily autonomy, they already experience death. And so this creates a suicide ideation because there is an aspiration for completion. So if you are going towards life, you will strive to live. There's an aspiration for completion. Okay, let's say if a person is willingly getting pregnant, then there's an aspiration for the baby to be born and to live. If you are starting a project that you're very passionate about, there's an aspiration for you to complete this project. Yes, but the person whose bodily autonomy is being violated, basically they are already experiencing half death, and the aspiration for completion is still there. And so there is a suicide ideation and high suicide rates, unfortunately, amongst the Inuit still. And you concur that with not speaking about problems, with history of colonization. And yes, incest is making people having lack of bodily autonomy, lack of sovereignty. This is in alignment with colonialization and apartheid, and whichever you, and unfortunately also genocide. Because when you have masses of people that don't have bodily autonomy, the desire for completion is basically for mass death. This is what we call genocide. It's not that they are to blame for what happened to them, no, but it's that we need to practice bodily autonomy. And biodiversity with willing consent is not about prohibiting, but about allowing love to come to fruition, the bodily autonomy to come to fruition, the moment of conception and the moment of childbirth to be joyous. Okay? This already brings more wealth into the bloodline, into the family, into the tribe, into the society. And of course, the desire to live, the completion desire, becomes the desire to live, to have children, or to build something beautiful, or to paint, or to sing, or to make love even, and even to make love without necessarily getting pregnant, okay? To enjoy life, so we're not worried about overpopulation, okay? The desire for completion is about life rather than about death. This, in essence, this is not a victim blaming. On the other way around, people need to have a bodily autonomy for having the desire to completion. That will give them the sovereignty that they so desire when they ask to go to the ancestral wisdom of a tribal society. In essence, we are all Inuit, as we are all African, as we are all Aryan, as we are all Jews. Okay? So right from the Inuit, we bring back the story of Sedna. And Sedna was this girl that was born to Inuit society. She was supposed to be married, but she did not like any of the people that her father brought to her. And some stories goes that eventually her father sold her to some man because he was worried that someone will take care of her. Okay, so she did not have the bodily autonomy because he actually wanted her to be alive. Okay, he wanted somebody to take care of her when he is gone. But because in Inuit society, woman could not take care of herself, and it was not a custom to take care of her good enough if she was not married to a man and participating in charity sex, which both men and women participated in. So let's say if a man would go to hunt, other men would have to make sure that the woman is sexually satisfied And if a guest would come, then the women would have to sleep with this guest as charity sex, more like hospitality. Yes, we know today that bodily autonomy and will and consent also between married couples, anytime you are sexual, okay, is very important to the well-being of people, not just for like candida or stuff like that, which also is also related, or fertility rates, but the overall sense of keeping the desire for completion around more life rather than death bringing. Yes, it doesn't mean that we should fear death, but definitely, when it's time, it's time. Before it's time, we are here to live, right? Um, And Sedna's story was such that she was either sold to this man, or she went after a man who promised her freedom. But unfortunately, he did not provide this freedom which he promised. And she tried to go back to her dad, or her dad tried to go back to save her. But there were ravens that were chasing the Sedna. There were ravens that were chasing Sedna, and she hung into the ship of her father, and they were making it crazy circles, so he could not even survive. He understood he would not be able not to save himself, not to save his daughter, but unfortunately what he did, maybe he had other daughters to take care of, other families, what he did, he cut off the hands or the fingers of Sedna, so she drowned into the sea, became the goddess of the sea, and the fish were kind of swimming between her hair, and kind of like and the ceremonies around Sedna, some of them is that you bring in a comb to comb Sedna's hair, because she had no hands, she couldn't do it herself. And the Inuit give reverence to Sedna because she provides their main food, which is the animals of the sea. And fishing is incredibly dangerous, especially in those areas around the colder oceans. There is abundance of fish, but is still dangerous, so life risking. So they would offer offers for Sedna to appease Sedna so that they can have food. Okay, but one major offer for Sedna is to abolish incest. It's one major offer to appease Sedna, and to give more life and the completion of life to Inuit society that we all came from, wherever we are on the lineage. So whether you're indigenous in the United States, indigenous in Africa, indigenous in the Middle East, whether you are of Abrahamic religion or atheist, or practically wherever you are, to allow biodiversity and to practice willing consent, to find the ability to say yes, no, and maybe as you see fit, and to enable that is driving the nature of the drive of completion, which is the drive of the moon. Moon Rahu drives to complete into the drive of completion of life, rather the completion of death, as when people have no autonomy, death is the drive, and that on a personal level we see it as suicide ideation. On a tribal level we see it as tribal wars, but also yes, tribal wars. On a national, moon is also the national level, we see it as genocide or apartheid or colonialism. Okay, and this is where we find a point of interference, not a point of blame, not a point of judgment, but the point that this was a blind spot, and this is a point of interference in each and every society, whether you are a Christian Norwegian, or a Zionist Palestinian, there are people like that, or is growing in Uganda or growing in United States. It doesn't matter, okay, because this is a point of interference that's relevant to all of our origins, and goes across the bloodlines, because our bloodlines are healing each other and giving each other more compatibility together than those tribal wars, those genocides, and those even elite families the parts of them that went out of bloodline segregation and eugenics prospered more, even within the same family. You see Rothschild family, you see the Rothschild that were marrying within themselves versus the Rothschilds that were consciously exposing themselves to other bloodlines. You see different practices. We see Bill Gates, he was a part of eugenic practices, and so you see that what he came up with is a vaccine he came up with, not good for humanity, destroying humanity, but it's also destructive to him. Okay, this is just the logic of eugenics, is not compatible with the physical incarnation. While biodiversity is, if you look at, oh, the Rothschild, is it? The Rothschild did both eugenics and biodiversity. Those who did biodiversity prospered more. Yet they were also more susceptible to be criticized, but it's not bad, because this is what actually strengthens your immune system. If you're making mistakes, you want to learn to do better. And our different cultures show us where we have blind spots. You know, Asians sometimes don't tell their children that they are loved, but they will do all the cooking and all the everything for their child, but they will not tell the child you are loved. Okay, if you go to academia in China, the whole village will pay for your academic studies. Okay, but the blind spot may be around, you know, you're expected to marry, you cannot have a boyfriend before school, expected to marry after school. Okay, and all these things. Or, but if you're born, let's say in Northern Europe, then you're not expected to be entrepreneur. You're expected to be just like everybody. And if you have some different idea, then you're looked upon as you're trying to overcome the people, you're trying to be better than them. And now you're just trying to shine. Whereas if you grow in America, you're expected to be self-sufficient and do something that perhaps is different, or you're even expected to kind of like, okay, what do you make of your life is a different question than, let's say, in Northern Europe. And so when we are meeting interculturally, then we actually can have, which is why it's important to allow for this perspective. Yes, if you have, let's say, one of the greatest critiques of Europeans is for Islam people to not accept satire. You have satire, you have Monty Python for Christian satire, you have the Jews are coming for Jewish satire. You do not have a satire for Muslims that we know of. Okay, and this does not allow those societies to receive. And unfortunately, where child brides is practiced, this is, of course, not good. But on the other hand, also expandable children practice by Western society in Europe and in the other Western parts of the world is also degrading the society. And this is, those two practices are meeting each other at the same point where the Inuits were. Incest, interracial marriages, and bloodline segregation, which makes a person feel that the wish for a completion is death rather than life. This is the essence of where it's at. And so it's good, Sedna reverence, to pay attention to this and to understand that our ancestral reverence does not mean we have to perpetuate our ancestral mistakes. It just means that we honor where we came from and we honor those who came before us, and we are here to enjoy life and to have the drive for completion of life rather than the drive for completion of death. So, easy eclipse.